Michael Drake was the kind of federal agent who believed in the weight of the badge he wore. For over a decade, he had built his reputation on an unwavering commitment to justice. He wasn't the kind of man who sought glory. He cared about the work, the grind, the quiet victories that kept the system running. But beneath his calm exterior was a sharp, relentless mind, one that refused to let go of a case until every question was answered. The case that would change everything began like many others. A flagged transaction during a standard financial audit. It was supposed to be routine, a mundane investigation into suspected tax evasion. The flagged transfer was tied to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, the kind often used by small-time scammers. But as Michael dug deeper, something didn't add up. The sums were too large, the patterns too deliberate. The more Michael unraveled, the more sinister the web became. The transactions weren't isolated, they were part of a massive money laundering operation that spanned continents. Billions of dollars were being funneled through shell companies and offshore accounts. It was the kind of operation that required serious muscle and even more serious connections. The deeper he went, the more one name kept appearing: Greg Walsh. Walsh was the CEO of one of the country's largest and most respected banks, a man revered for his philanthropic efforts and keen business sense. To the public, Walsh was a financial genius and a hero. To Michael, he was beginning to look like the mastermind behind one of the largest money laundering schemes in history. Weeks into the investigation, Michael uncovered a lead that felt like striking gold. A series of leaked emails between Walsh's senior executives revealed clear intent to launder funds through offshore accounts. One email explicitly mentioned a $500 million transfer disguised as a charitable contribution. It was the smoking gun Michael needed to build his case. He prepared meticulously, gathering every shred of evidence, cross-referencing financial records, and connecting the dots. By the time he was ready to act, the case against Walsh was airtight. Michael was ready to make an arrest. The day Michael presented his findings to his superiors at the Bureau felt like a victory. As he laid out the evidence against Walsh, he could see the weight of his case landing in the room. His colleagues were stunned, and for a moment, he felt the thrill of justice within reach. But then came the call. "Drake, hold off," his supervisor said, the tone uncharacteristically tense. "What do you mean, hold off? We have everything we need," Michael protested. "It's coming from the top," his supervisor replied. "Richard Cross wants a private briefing before anything moves forward." Michael froze. Richard Cross, the head of the FBI, was a man he respected deeply. Cross had been a mentor, someone who had shaped Michael's career. If anyone would understand the importance of this case, it was Cross. But when Michael walked into Cross's office that evening, the atmosphere was different. Cross didn't greet him warmly or commend him on the case. Instead, he sat in silence, flipping through the file, his expression unreadable. "This is thorough work, Michael," Cross finally said, his voice calm but cold. "But we're not pursuing it." Michael's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about? Walsh is laundering billions of dollars. We can't just let this go." Cross leaned back in his chair, his steely gaze fixed on Michael. "Walsh is complicated. He's connected. You don't understand the implications of taking him down." "Implications?" Michael shot back. "He's a criminal. This isn't about politics, it's about justice." Cross's voice hardened. "This is over, Drake. I'm shutting it down. That's an order." Michael stared at Cross, his mind racing. For the first time in his career, he felt the system crack beneath him. The man he had trusted most was covering for a criminal, and there was nothing he could do, at least not through official channels. "Got it. Let's rewind and focus solely on how Michael comes up with the plan, diving deep into his thought process, the challenges he anticipates, and the meticulous preparation he undertakes. This will be a detailed, step-by-step breakdown of his realization and planning phase, starting right from his betrayal by Cross." Michael stared at Cross, his mind racing. For the first time in his career, he felt the system crack beneath him. The man he had trusted most was covering for a criminal, and there was nothing he could do, at least not through official channels. The office was silent when he left, but his thoughts were anything but. His mind churned with anger, disbelief, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. Cross's words echoed in his head. "Let it go, Drake. You'll regret it if you don't." Michael knew there was no way to let it go. Greg Walsh wasn't just laundering billions. He was financing organized crime, ruining lives, and walking free because of a corrupt system. Cross's betrayal was a symptom of a bigger disease, one Michael could no longer ignore. That night Michael sat in his small apartment, the files he had managed to copy spread across his coffee table. They were damning, but without institutional support, they were useless. Walsh had built an empire of influence and Cross had shielded it. Exposing them through official means was impossible. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and then down at the names on the documents. Walsh's empire depended on one thing: money. Billions of dollars moved through his accounts like water through pipes. The offshore accounts, the shell corporations, they were all worthless without the cash flow keeping them alive. That was when the idea struck. Take the money, but not just steal it. That would make him a thief, no better than Walsh. No, he needed to make it matter. If he could take the money and expose its criminal origins, Walsh's empire would crumble. And if he could tie it back to Cross, it would bring down the corruption at the top of the FBI. Michael knew Walsh's private vault was the linchpin. It wasn't just a bank vault, it was a fortress. Hidden beneath Walsh's flagship bank in the city center, the vault held $150 million in liquid cash, earmarked for a major offshore transfer. The vault wasn't just protected by state-of-the-art security, it was backed by Walsh's influence. Any attempt to breach it would trigger alarms, mobilize private security, and potentially involve federal oversight. He needed to get inside without anyone knowing he was there. Michael started by gathering intel. Over the next week, he used his FBI clearance to access building schematics, security protocols, and transport schedules. He learned the vault was serviced monthly by a private security firm, and every transfer required 2 levels of clearance, one from the bank manager and another from an external contractor. That gave him an opening. He could infiltrate the transfer process, posing as part of the team overseeing the next move. But that wasn't enough. He needed a way to extract the money without triggering suspicion. Michael realized he couldn't do this alone. His first move was to contact Samantha Cole, a cybersecurity expert he'd worked with years ago. She had been blacklisted after exposing corruption in a government contract, and she owed Michael for helping her avoid jail time. "I need someone who can get me into a vault without setting off alarms," Michael told her over a secure line. "That's not exactly subtle, Drake," Samantha replied. "What are you planning?" "Justice," he said simply. Next, he approached Ben Rodriguez, a former Marine turned driver for hire. Ben had a reputation for getting people out of impossible situations, and Michael knew his skills would be invaluable. "Ben, I need a driver," Michael said when they met at a secluded diner. Ben raised an eyebrow. "What kind of driver?" "The kind who can get me out of downtown with $150 million in the back seat." Finally, Michael reached out to Marcus "Brick" Hayes, a former cop who had been framed by Walsh's network. Marcus had spent years trying to clear his name, and Michael knew he'd jump at the chance for revenge. "I don't need muscle," Michael told Marcus. "I need someone who knows how cops think, someone who can stay 2 steps ahead." Marcus leaned back, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You're going after Walsh, aren't you? Count me in." Over the next month, the 4 of them worked in secret, piecing together a plan that had to be flawless. 1. Infiltration. Samantha hacked into the bank's systems, creating a fake maintenance schedule for the vault. This would give Michael and Marcus access to the building under the guise of a security audit. 2nd, diversion. Ben would stage a traffic accident near the bank, forcing law enforcement and private security to focus their attention elsewhere. The heist. Michael and Marcus would enter the vault during the scheduled transfer, using forged credentials to bypass the clearance protocols. Samantha would remotely disable the alarms, giving them a 10-minute window to extract the cash. 4th extraction. Ben would pick them up in an unmarked van, leading them through a pre-mapped escape route that avoided major checkpoints. The cover-up. To throw off suspicion, Samantha would plant false leads in the bank's security logs, making it look like the heist was carried out by an international hacking group. Every part of the plan was a gamble. If any piece failed, they would all go down. Michael spent sleepless nights rehearsing every detail, accounting for every contingency. He knew Walsh would retaliate if he caught wind of the plan, and Cross wouldn't hesitate to bury him if he was exposed. But Michael also knew the risks were worth it. Taking the money wasn't just about crippling Walsh. It was about exposing the corruption that had poisoned the FBI. As the date of the heist approached, Michael stood in his apartment, staring at the files that had started it all. His hands trembled, but his resolve was unshakable. "This isn't just for me," he whispered to himself. "This is for everyone they've hurt." The plan was set. The pieces were in place. Now all they had to do was pull it off. The morning of the heist began with a tense silence. Michael stood by the window of his apartment, watching the sun rise over the city. Every detail had been accounted for, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something could still go wrong. "Focus," he told himself. "Stick to the plan." By 8 a.m., the team was in position. Samantha had set up her command station in a nearby apartment overlooking the bank. Her laptop screen glowed with live feeds from hacked security cameras and GPS trackers on the armored trucks. Ben parked a decoy delivery van a few blocks away, while Marcus blended into the morning crowd near the bank's entrance, dressed as a maintenance worker. Michael, dressed in a tailored suit with forged credentials tucked into his pocket, arrived at the bank precisely at 9:15 a.m. His disguise as a private security auditor was flawless. Walsh's bank staff, accustomed to bureaucratic oversight, barely gave him a second glance. "Security audit," Michael said calmly as he flashed his forged badge at the receptionist. She gave him a polite smile, nodding toward the elevators. "Third floor, sir, the manager is expecting you." Michael suppressed a smirk. Samantha's forged email had worked perfectly. The bank manager believed this was a surprise compliance check, something designed to test their readiness. It was the perfect cover. He stepped into the elevator, his heart pounding in rhythm with the hum of the machinery. He glanced at the mirrored walls, taking one last look at his composed facade. The manager, a nervous middle-aged man named Paul Hastings, greeted Michael with an eager handshake. "Mr. Davidson, right? We've been expecting you," Paul said, trying to mask his unease. "That's correct," Michael replied, his tone professional. "We'll begin with an overview of your vault protocols. Please lead the way." Paul nodded, gesturing for Michael to follow. As they walked through the pristine marble hallways, Michael discreetly glanced at his watch. Everything was on schedule. Down in the basement, the vault's reinforced steel doors loomed like a fortress. 2 armed guards stood by, eyeing Michael warily. "Routine check," Paul reassured them. "Mr. Davidson here is from compliance." The guards exchanged glances but stepped aside. Michael handed Paul a clipboard with a checklist Samantha had fabricated. "I'll need you to authorize the vault access," Michael said, pointing to the digital keypad. Paul hesitated but complied, entering his code. As the vault door hissed open, Michael felt the adrenaline surge through him. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, the shelves stacked with neatly bundled cash. Meanwhile, outside the bank, Marcus played his part. Dressed as a maintenance worker, he directed traffic as Ben staged a minor accident involving a delivery truck and a city vehicle. The collision was loud enough to draw attention, but not so severe as to raise suspicions. Police units diverted to the scene, leaving the area around the bank momentarily underprotected. Samantha monitored the situation from her laptop, relaying updates to Michael through a concealed earpiece. "Diversion's in place," Samantha said. "You've got about 10 minutes before they start sniffing around." Michael worked quickly but deliberately. He snapped open his briefcase, revealing a specialized scanner designed by Samantha. It would override the secondary security locks on the vault's shelves. "What's that for?" Paul asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Standard protocol," Michael lied smoothly. "Ensures all currency is accounted for." As the scanner beeped, Michael discreetly activated a secondary device, jamming the bank's internal alarm system. Samantha's voice crackled in his ear. "Alarm systems are frozen. Cameras are looping old footage. You're clear." Michael began loading the bundles of cash into his briefcase. To Paul, it looked like a routine check, but each movement was calculated. Just as Michael was about to close the vault, the guards outside received a call on their radios. "Report to the main lobby immediately," the voice commanded. One of the guards turned to Michael and Paul. "You'll need to wrap this up. Something's come up upstairs." Michael's pulse quickened. This wasn't part of the plan. If the guards stayed, they might notice something off. He nodded calmly, closing his briefcase and signaling to Samantha. "Adjust the loop on camera feed 4, he whispered into his mic. "Done," Samantha replied. "What's happening?" "We're running out of time," Michael said under his breath. As they exited the vault, Michael feigned a phone call and excused himself. Paul returned to his office, none the wiser. Michael made his way to a service elevator leading to the loading dock, where Marcus was waiting with a utility van. "Package secured," Michael said as he climbed into the van, the briefcase heavy in his lap. Ben was already behind the wheel, the engine idling. Samantha's voice came through the radio. "Police are starting to clear the accident. You've got 2 minutes to get out of there." "Go," Marcus said. The van sped out of the loading dock, blending into the morning traffic just as police sirens began converging on the bank. The team regrouped at a safe house on the outskirts of the city. Michael placed the briefcase on the table, snapping it open to reveal the stacks of cash inside. "That's not just money," Samantha said, pointing to the files buried beneath the bundles. "That's proof. Transactions, names, everything we need to take Walsh down." Michael nodded, his expression grim. "We've just started a war. They'll know it was us." Marcus grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Let them come. We've got what we need." Ben leaned back, a smirk on his face. "So what's next, boss?" Michael stared at the money, his mind already racing with the next steps. "Now we expose them." At the safe house, the team gathered around the table, the briefcase full of cash and evidence in front of them. The atmosphere was tense but triumphant. For the first time in weeks, Michael felt a glimmer of hope. They had pulled off the impossible, $150 million in stolen cash and evidence that could topple Walsh and Cross. But the fight wasn't over. Michael wasted no time. He began sorting through the files they had retrieved from the vault, ledgers, transaction records, and incriminating emails. Each document painted a damning picture of Walsh's network, how he laundered money for organized crime, bribed officials, and funneled millions into Cross's pockets to keep the FBI at bay. "We can't just dump this into the system," Michael said, his voice firm. "Cross will bury it the moment it surfaces. We need to go public in a way he can't control." Samantha nodded, her fingers flying over her laptop. "I can leak it to a few trusted journalists, the kind who won't back down, even under pressure." "What about the money?" Ben asked, leaning back in his chair. "It's a nice payday, but if we're caught with it, we're toast." Michael thought for a moment. "We keep a portion to fund our escape and secure anonymity. The rest we use as leverage. Leave it in a place where it'll be found, with enough breadcrumbs to tie it to Walsh and Cross." Marcus grinned. "You're making them dig their own graves. I like it." Leaking the evidence. The turning point. Michael sat at the table in the safe house, the files and cash spread out before him. His mind was racing. The money would cripple Walsh, but it was the evidence, those damning files, that would destroy both Walsh and Cross. The challenge was getting it into the right hands without being intercepted. Samantha, hunched over her laptop, had already begun sorting through the trove of incriminating data. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she decrypted files and cross-referenced names, dates, and account numbers. The scope of Walsh's operation was staggering. Transactions tied to drug cartels, payments to corrupt politicians, and even direct deposits into Cross's personal accounts. "We've got it all," Samantha said, her voice tense but triumphant. "This isn't just enough to take them down. This will bury them." Michael leaned over her shoulder, studying the spreadsheets and emails glowing on the screen. "But we can't just dump it all online. Walsh and Cross will spin it as a smear campaign or claim it's fake. We need credible journalists, people who won't back down no matter how much pressure they're under." Samantha compiled a list of journalists and media outlets with reputations for investigative integrity. They needed reporters who had exposed government corruption before and had the resources to withstand Walsh's inevitable legal and financial retaliation. "Linda Price," Samantha said, pulling up a profile on her screen. "She's with the National Enquirer. She broke the story about that senator's offshore accounts last year." "She's good," Michael agreed, "but she'll need backup. Who else?" "David Chen at Independent Wire," Samantha replied. "And maybe Caroline Vega from Global Dispatch. If we send it to all three at the same time, they can corroborate each other's work. It'll be harder for Walsh or Cross to discredit." Michael nodded. "Do it. But make sure we're untraceable. If they find out where this came from, we're finished." Samantha worked through the night, compiling a polished, comprehensive dossier. The files were organized into categories: bank statements, transaction logs, and ledgers linking Walsh to the laundering operations, emails and memos exposing payments to politicians, judges, and law enforcement, direct evidence of Cross's involvement, including wire transfers and internal memos, instructing agents to ignore Walsh-related investigations. Each section was accompanied by annotations explaining the significance of the evidence, ensuring that even a casual reader could understand the scope of the conspiracy. "This is airtight," Samantha said, leaning back in her chair. "If they ignore this, they're complicit." As Samantha sent the encrypted files to the selected journalists, Michael felt a fleeting sense of relief. They had chosen the best, the most credible and fearless reporters who wouldn't be silenced by threats or bribes. But what Michael didn't know was that one of those journalists, David Chen, wasn't entirely what he seemed. David Chen had built his reputation as an independent journalist, someone who exposed corruption no matter the cost. But what few people knew was that Chen had a darker side. Years ago, he had taken a bribe from Greg Walsh to bury a story about one of Walsh's shell companies. Since then, Walsh kept him on a short leash, using him as an informant whenever sensitive information threatened to surface. When Chen received the encrypted dossier, he immediately recognized the scope of the evidence. This wasn't just another expose. This could destroy Walsh's empire and possibly implicate him as an accessory. Chen hesitated. He was in too deep with Walsh, but the evidence was irrefutable. If he ignored it, other journalists would break the story, and Walsh would know Chen failed to alert him. If he acted against Walsh, he risked losing the financial security Walsh provided. After a sleepless night, Chen made the call. "Greg," Chen began, his voice low, "there's a situation. A massive leak involving you, the bank, and Cross. The files are legitimate and multiple outlets have them. If this gets out, I don't pay you to call me with bad news, David," Walsh snapped. "What's the source?" "It's anonymous, but the evidence points to someone inside the FBI. I think it's Michael Drake. His name keeps coming up." Walsh's jaw tightened. "Drake," he hissed. "Of course it's him. Listen carefully. Stall the story. Buy us time to spin this. Do whatever it takes, but keep it quiet." Chen nodded, though his stomach churned. "I'll try. But Greg, it's gonna come out. There's no stopping it completely." "Then you better make sure you're on the right side when it does," Walsh warned before hanging up. Meanwhile, the other two journalists, Linda Price and Caroline Vega, had already begun working on the story. Linda, who was known for her tenacity, had reached out to whistleblowers within the banking industry to corroborate the evidence. Caroline had begun drafting the article, outlining how Walsh and Cross operated a shadow network of corruption for over a decade. David Chen, under pressure from Walsh, played along. He collaborated with Linda and Caroline, pretending to share their determination to break the story. But behind the scenes, he was feeding Walsh updates, including which parts of the dossier the journalists planned to emphasize. With Chen's intel, Walsh moved quickly. He contacted his PR team and lawyers, preparing to discredit the story before it could gain traction. At the same time, he reached out to Cross, who ordered an internal bureau statement labeling Michael Drake as a rogue agent and fugitive responsible for the bank heist. Within hours, Walsh's spin began circulating. Anonymous sources claimed the leaked evidence was fabricated, part of a personal vendetta by Drake. Social media flooded with posts questioning the credibility of the journalists. But David Chen wasn't as loyal as Walsh believed. As he worked on the story with Linda and Caroline, something shifted in him. The overwhelming evidence in the dossier reminded him of why he became a journalist in the first place. Walsh had controlled him for years, but this was an opportunity to finally break free. Chen decided to play both sides. He continued feeding Walsh just enough information to keep him complacent, but he deliberately withheld key details from Walsh, particularly the most damning evidence tying Cross to the laundering scheme. 3 days later, Linda and Caroline were ready to publish. Chen, under mounting pressure, had to make a choice. At the last minute, he contributed a key piece of evidence to the article, an internal memo he'd received years ago from Walsh, which confirmed Walsh's involvement in laundering money for organized crime. "I'm in," Chen told Linda as he forwarded the memo. "Let's take him down." Linda raised an eyebrow but didn't question his sudden commitment. Together, the three journalists finalized the story, ensuring it was airtight and impossible to discredit. The article was published simultaneously on 3 major platforms. The headline was damning: "Banking Scandal of the Decade, Greg Walsh and Richard Cross Exposed." The evidence, now public, sparked outrage across the country. Protests erupted outside Walsh's bank headquarters. Cross faced mounting pressure from within the FBI, with agents demanding his resignation. Meanwhile, Walsh realized Chen had betrayed him. Furious, he ordered his private security team to track Chen down. But Chen, anticipating Walsh's retaliation, had already gone into hiding. From the safe house, Michael watched the news coverage with a mix of relief and satisfaction. The journalists had done their job, and the truth was finally out. But he also knew that Walsh and Cross weren't finished. "They're going to retaliate," Michael said, pacing the room. Samantha nodded. "Walsh has too much to lose. He'll come after you and anyone connected to this." Michael glanced at the burner phone on the table. "Then we need to be ready. This isn't over yet." Part 5. An Unexpected Ally. As Michael paced in the safe house formulating his next move, Samantha's burner phone buzzed with an unknown number. She frowned and answered cautiously. "Who is this?" she demanded. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Agent Sarah Calloway, Internal Affairs, FBI. I know you're with Michael Drake and I need to speak with him immediately. It's urgent." Michael froze when Samantha relayed the message. "Internal Affairs?" he muttered. "This could be a setup." Samantha nodded. "Could be. But if they're calling, it means they know something we don't." After a moment's hesitation, Michael took the phone. "This is Drake. Make it quick." "Drake, I've been watching Walsh for years," Calloway said, "and I know about Cross. Everything you leaked confirms what I've been trying to prove. I can help you, but we need to move fast. Cross is preparing a full-scale operation to hunt you down. If you want to survive this, you need government protection." Michael's jaw tightened. "And why should I trust you?" Calloway's voice softened. "Because I hate Cross more than you do. He's the reason my partner is dead, and I've been biding my time to bring him down. Your evidence just gave me the ammunition I needed. But we need to act now. I'm taking this directly to the president." Calloway moved quickly. She compiled the leaked evidence, combined it with her own investigation, and bypassed Cross entirely, submitting it directly to the president's chief of staff. Within hours, the White House was briefed on the depth of corruption within the FBI and the implications of Walsh's laundering schemes. The president, furious at the idea of corruption infecting the Bureau, issued a direct order to place Michael Drake and his team under temporary governmental protection, while an independent task force was formed to investigate Walsh and Cross. Michael received the news through Calloway later that evening. "The president is on our side," she said. "You'll have protection, but you need to come in now." Michael hesitated. "And how do I know this isn't a trap?" Calloway's voice was steady. "You don't. But staying on the run won't fix this. You have my word. I'll make sure you and your team stay safe." The team relocated to a secure facility under the watch of an independent unit assigned by the president. It was a strange feeling for Michael. After being hunted for weeks, he was now being treated like an asset. Calloway met them in person, a tall, no-nonsense agent with sharp eyes and a determined expression. "You've done the hard part," she told Michael. "You exposed them. Now it's time to dismantle their operation for good." "How?" Michael asked. "Cross and Walsh still have powerful allies," Calloway explained. "They're already working to discredit you and the evidence. We need to hit them with something undeniable, a direct link between their actions and crimes the public can't ignore." Michael frowned. "We already have the evidence. What else is there?" Calloway smirked. "Walsh has a hidden offshore account that Cross uses to stash bribes. If we can expose that account, it's game over, and I know where to find it." Michael and his team, now operating with the backing of Calloway's independent unit, began working to uncover the offshore account. Samantha worked alongside government analysts, tracking encrypted financial transactions and piecing together a trail that led to a private bank in the Caribbean. Calloway coordinated the effort, ensuring Walsh's allies in the FBI couldn't interfere. "Once we have the account details, we'll release them to the media alongside a formal indictment. Walsh and Cross won't be able to escape this." With government protection secured and Walsh and Cross on the defensive, Michael and his team knew they had to deliver a decisive blow. The leaks had sparked public outrage, but Walsh's PR team and Cross's allies within the Bureau were working tirelessly to discredit the evidence. The final move needed to be undeniable, something that couldn't be spun, silenced, or ignored. Agent Sarah Calloway approached the team with a grim expression. "We've got one last shot to end this. Walsh's private accounts and Cross's directives are damning, but they're still arguing it's fabricated. What we need is a smoking gun, a real-time connection that ties both of them directly to their crimes." Michael leaned forward. "What are you proposing?" Calloway laid out a classified file on the table. "There's a scheduled meeting in 3 days between Walsh and his key financial backers, people who've benefited from his laundering schemes. Cross is supposed to be there too, acting as their protector. They're meeting to coordinate a counterattack. If we can infiltrate that meeting and capture their discussion, it's game over." Samantha frowned. "And how exactly do we get in? Walsh's meetings are locked down tighter than a fortress." Calloway smirked. "We're going to crash their party, literally." The meeting was scheduled to take place at a private estate on the outskirts of the city, owned by one of Walsh's closest allies. Security was expected to be airtight: armed guards, surveillance drones, and an encrypted communication network that isolated the location from outside interference. Michael and the team devised a two-pronged approach. 1. Infiltration. Marcus and Michael would pose as security contractors hired for the event, gaining entry to the estate. 2. Surveillance setup. Samantha and Calloway would remotely disable the estate's communication network and plant surveillance devices inside the meeting room. The objective was clear: record Walsh and Cross discussing their crimes in detail, capturing their own words as irrefutable evidence. On the day of the meeting, Marcus and Michael arrived at the estate in a black SUV, dressed in tactical uniforms and carrying forged credentials. The guards at the entrance inspected their IDs, scanning them into a database. Samantha's voice crackled through Michael's earpiece. "You're clear. Their system thinks you're legit. Just don't linger too long near the main servers. They're heavily monitored." Once inside, Marcus split off to survey the perimeter, ensuring they had an escape route. Michael headed toward the main building, keeping his movements calculated and calm. Meanwhile, Samantha and Calloway, stationed in a van parked miles away, worked to breach the estate's encrypted communication network. Samantha's fingers flew across her keyboard, disabling the surveillance drones one by one. "We're in," Samantha said. "You've got about 20 minutes before they notice something's wrong." Michael positioned himself near the entrance to the meeting room, blending in with the other security personnel. Through the slightly ajar doors he could hear voices: Walsh's smooth, commanding tone and Cross's gruff, authoritative replies. Walsh's words sent a chill down Michael's spine. "The leaks are a problem, but nothing we can't manage. As long as the evidence stays fragmented, public attention will move on. Cross is already taking care of the weak links in the Bureau." Cross's voice followed, cold and calculating. "Drake's the priority. Once he's neutralized, this whole thing collapses. He's the face of this mess, and without him, the story dies. Michael activated the hidden camera embedded in his lapel, angling it to capture the men's faces. Samantha's voice came through his earpiece. "We've got audio and video. Keep it steady, and don't blow your cover." As the meeting progressed, Michael recorded Walsh and Cross openly discussing their crimes. They named associates, detailed financial schemes, and even mentioned bribes to high-ranking officials. It was the smoking gun they needed. But just as Michael was about to leave, Walsh's assistant walked into the room and handed him a tablet. Walsh frowned, staring at the screen. "Someone's tampered with the system," Walsh said, his voice sharp. "Shut down all external access now, we've got a mole." Michael's heart raced. He turned to leave, but a guard stepped in front of him. "Hold it," the guard said. "Where are you going?" Thinking fast, Michael feigned calm. "Perimeter check. Orders from the control room." The guard hesitated, but Walsh's growing anger distracted him. "Find the breach and shut it down," Walsh barked. Michael slipped out, his mind racing. "They're on to us," he whispered into his mic. As Michael made his way toward the exit, the estate erupted into chaos. Guards were on high alert, searching for the breach. Samantha and Calloway worked frantically to maintain their access, ensuring the recorded footage was transmitted to a secure server. Marcus met Michael near the estate's side gate. "Time to go," Marcus said, pulling a smoke grenade from his belt. The two launched the grenade, creating a thick cloud that obscured their movements. Under cover of smoke, they sprinted to the SUV and sped off, narrowly avoiding detection. Back at the safe house, Samantha confirmed the footage had been uploaded successfully. "We've got everything," she said, relief evident in her voice. "This is it. Walsh and Cross can't wriggle out of this." The next morning, the footage was leaked to every major news outlet. Clips of Walsh and Cross openly discussing their crimes played on a loop, dominating headlines. Caught on tape. Walsh and Cross discuss criminal network. The evidence was undeniable. Public outrage reached a fever pitch, and within hours, federal agents raided Walsh's estate and Cross's office. Both men were arrested on live television, their faces plastered across every screen in the country. Michael watched from the safe house, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. For the first time, he felt like justice had been served. "You're right. Let's revise and make this a more realistic and cohesive ending where the team doesn't have to run, but resolves everything within the system, ensuring a proper conclusion." The recovery of the stolen money became a pivotal moment. After Michael's evidence and the planted recordings exposed Walsh and Cross, their entire empire began to collapse. The trial was swift and decisive, with overwhelming public support and government oversight ensuring transparency. With both Walsh and Cross convicted, Michael and his team found themselves at a crossroads. The government offered them protection after their role in exposing corruption became clear. Publicly, they were framed not as criminals but as whistleblowers who had risked everything to dismantle one of the largest corruption networks in modern history. The money, however, was the lingering question. The team had been responsible for stealing it in the first place, even if it was part of their strategy to reveal Walsh's crimes. Michael made the decision that the money should go back. Every dollar, he argued, was a part of the system they had fought to correct. Keeping even a portion would undermine their credibility and tarnish the justice they had achieved. The team coordinated with Agent Calloway to facilitate the return. The government created a task force to audit the funds and ensure they were redistributed properly. Walsh's ill-gotten wealth went toward reparations for his victims, businesses and individuals who had been financially ruined by his predatory schemes. A significant portion was earmarked for rebuilding community programs Walsh had siphoned funds from under the guise of charity. This public act of restitution further solidified the team's legacy as heroes, not thieves. With the money returned and the evidence of their heist now tied to their mission for justice, Michael and his team were formally cleared of any wrongdoing. The president, acknowledging the systemic failures that had allowed Walsh and Cross to thrive, issued a public statement commending their bravery and sacrifice. Michael's team became a symbol of integrity, a rare story of individuals who fought the system and won. Samantha, Marcus, and Ben stood alongside Michael as the president personally thanked them during a televised ceremony. The FBI underwent sweeping reforms under new leadership, with Cross's arrest sending ripples through the organization. Internal investigations uncovered more corruption, leading to a wide-scale purge of compromised agents. The team didn't run. They didn't have to. With government protection and the public's support, they were free to start anew, each choosing their path forward. Samantha decided to join the newly reformed FBI as a cybersecurity consultant, helping to ensure the Bureau couldn't be compromised by people like Walsh and Cross again. Her expertise became instrumental in building systems that protected whistleblowers and exposed corruption. Marcus, cleared of the false charges that had ended his police career, was offered a position as a federal investigator. He accepted, determined to help rebuild public trust in law enforcement. His experience made him a relentless advocate for justice, and he became known as one of the most principled agents in the Bureau. Ben, though less interested in staying tied to the system, chose a quieter life. He retired to a small town, living modestly and enjoying the peace he had fought so hard to earn. He kept in touch with the others, always ready to lend a hand if they needed him. Michael, the man who had risked everything, was offered a chance to return to the FBI, but he declined. Instead, he chose to focus on helping communities that had been devastated by Walsh's schemes. Using his connections, he founded a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting victims of financial fraud and corruption, ensuring their voices were heard.